Mikali. Thank you again for attending. I hope you guys are making use of these classes. I'm seeing familiar faces every week, which is good. Thea has just reminded us that on Wednesday there's a class as well, so please make time to attend that class. Also remember that we are still available on the module site for any questions that you may have. Just make sure you post them on the right discussion forum. So I hope to see you again during the week on the discussion forums. And I hope you are to date all enjoying this module and you are understanding the concepts, because if I don't see a lot of you on the module site, I can only assume it means that you are understanding the concepts. But if you are not, we are on the module site and we will answer your questions as promptly as possible. So please feel free to post the right questions under the right learning units. So this week we deal with learning unit 4. We dealt with half of learning unit 4 last week, where we introduced the ISLM model. Today we go for an extension of that. So we're still in learning unit 4, but today's main focus is on policy mix. So this is how monetary and fiscal policy interact on the ISLM model. So as always, please feel free to drop a question on the chat box. Raise your hand. If I don't see you because I am on presentation mode, please do feel free to interrupt me and I'm happy to engage throughout the class. Okay, so just a recap from last week. Last week we introduced the ISLM model. We said the IS model was derived from the goods market. We said that we needed to make some assumptions from what we learned in learning unit 2, which was to say, instead of having our investment function as an autonomous variable, we will then have it as a function of income and interest. So after we made that assumption, we then derived the IS curve, which was a downward sloping curve with interest rates on the vertical axis and your level of income on the y-axis. And we said our IS curve was derived from the goods market and all the variables that we have learned so far that affect the demand of goods. So government spending, taxation, consumption, autonomous consumption, disposable income, all of that we said would affect your IS curve. And we said if it was exogenous variables, your IS curve would shift up and down. But if it was a change in interest rate, then your IS curve, it will be a movement along the IS curve. So that's just a recap from last week. We did the same with the LM model. We derived an LM model. We said our LM model was derived from our financial market. We said in South Africa, our LM model is always horizontal. We said it would always be horizontal because our Reserve Bank targets interest rates directly, unlike other central banks. So because the Reserve Bank targets our interest rates directly, wherever the targeted interest rate is, that is the point at which our LM curve is going to be. And it will always be horizontal at that interest rate. So any changes in interest rates will always be a shift upward or downward of the LM curve. So that was the recap of the derivation of the LM curve. We then said a combination of the IS curve and LM curve gives us ISLM model, which is on the left of my panel of my screen. I encouraged you that every time you draw this model, please make sure that you have labeled your IS curve. You do not need to write goods market. You label it as IS 0 for your initial IS curve. For your initial LM curve, you also label it as LM0. Then whatever new curve that is being analyzed, that will then become your IS1 and your LM1. You'll see that when we get to the examples. We then said at the point of intersection, where the IS curve and the LM curve intersect, you have a point A, which is our equilibrium of our model, right? So where they intersect, you then will have Y0 and interest rate 0. Always label your vertical axis as interest rate, so small letter I, and your y-axis, your x-axis as your level of income, or big letter Y. So we said things for us to remember is that the level of income or output is our only endogenous variable in this model. So this is the variable that is determined within the model. And then all the other variables affecting Y, so government spending, taxes, consumption, investment, investor confidence, and all the other variables that you think would affect demand, all of those are then exogenous variables that are determined outside of the model. We also introduced the concept of fiscal policy and monetary policy. We said fiscal policy is twofold. So there's an expansionary fiscal policy and there's a contractionary.
Sorry, Carly.
Sure.
Sorry, Carly. The students, I can only see slide 1 from my side still.
Oh no, I'm already on slide 4.
Yes, maybe I don't know. There's slide. Yeah, there's slide 4 now. Thank you.
So I think you guys are fine with slide 2, right? So this is where we derived our IS model, where I was saying our IS curve is downward sloping and it's a function of interest rates on your vertical axis and the level of outcome or output or income on the x-axis. Then I went to slide number 3. Can you see slide number 3?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So on slide number 3, I was talking about the derivation of the LM curve, and I just reminded ourselves that the LM curve is derived from the financial market, and in South Africa, our LM curve is horizontal because our Reserve Bank targets interest rate directly. So any changes in interest rate will be a shift up or down on the LM curve. I was then on slide 4. On slide 4, I was just explaining this is our equilibrium where our IS curve and our LM curve intersect. I had encouraged us to always label our diagram. On the vertical axis, we have our interest rates, small letter I. On the x-axis, we've got our level of income and output, that's big letter Y. And then where they intersect, where you see the A, that is our equilibrium point, and we should always label that. We should always label our IS, LM diagrams. So IS is the downward sloping one, LM is the horizontal one. And then things to remember is just that your level of income is the only endogenous variable. That's the variable that is determined within the model, and everything else is exogenous. Government spending, taxes, consumption, investment, investor confidence, all of that is determined outside the model, and it influences our level of income. We also introduced last week the concept of fiscal policy and monetary policy. We said there are two types of policies, fiscal and monetary, and they can either be expansionary or contractionary. We said anything that is aimed at increasing the level of income or increasing the level of output, we call that expansionary. So it expands our economy. But anything that has the objective of reducing the level of income or the level of output, we call that contractionary, because it will contract or reduce our level of income. We said our fiscal policy, that is the government intervention by Treasury or by government, or intervention by government by way of government spending and taxes to affect the economy, whilst our monetary policy is government intervention by way of interest rates and money supply to affect the economy. So that's just a recap from last week. Now we get into the discussion of today, which is the policy mix in the ISLM model. So by policy mix, we're talking about the use of monetary and fiscal policy in the model, ISLM model, to achieve certain objectives. So sometimes the government would want to reduce the budget deficit. Sometimes they want to reduce the unemployment rate. Sometimes there's a recession and they need to put in place policies to bring the economy out of the recession. So they employ a policy mix, which is the use of both monetary and fiscal policy. Can you guys see slide 6?
Yes, Carly.
Thank you, Tia. Okay, so today's class, as I said, is an extension from last week. So we can just start with an example. There's not much in terms of new concepts that we're introducing. So if the objective of government is to reduce the budget deficit, what is a budget deficit? Anybody?
When the government spends more than it gets.
When the government spends
more of the income that it gets via taxes and so forth.
Okay. So when G is greater than T, yeah?
Yeah.
So when government spending is greater than the taxes being the revenues earned by government. So if the government aims to reduce the budget deficit, what kind of policy would they employ? Would they employ a contractionary policy or an expansionary policy? They would employ a contractionary policy, right? So if they were to employ a contractionary policy, which contractionary policy would they employ?
The increase of taxes.
Okay, perfect. One, they could increase taxes. What other option would they have?
Reduce government spending.
Exactly. So they could reduce government spending. Okay, so if these are the two options that government has to reduce the government deficit, how then do we analyze this on our ISLM model? So let's think about the work we did last week. So this is a contractionary. So what you see on your screen is the answer. You need to be able to do this from scratch without seeing the answer. So if you draw your diagram, you draw your I on the vertical axis and your Y on the horizontal axis. You've got your downward sloping IS curve. We'll call that IS0. You've got your horizontal LM curve. We'll call that LM0. At the intersection, you've got your Y0 and your I0. So this is the initial point where you've got a government deficit, a budget deficit. So we're saying to correct for this, government would, let's take the instance of reducing the government spending. We'll also do the example of increasing taxes. The effect will be the same, yeah? So if we reduce government spending, which curve is affected? So we go back to last week. Which curve is affected by a reduction in government spending? Is it the IS curve or the LM curve?
The IS curve.
Okay, correct. The IS curve is affected. Which direction does it, is it shifting or is it a movement along the curve?
It's shifting to the left.
It's shifting to the left.
Oh,
Okay, so if it shifts to the left, we draw our arrow showing a shift to the left. We draw our new IS curve, the left side of the first one. You label it as IS 1, right?
Yes,
If you
ma'am.
label it as IS1, what happens then? What happens to our interest rates and what happens to our level of income?
Our interest rate will decrease.
No, our
Why?
interest rates will not decrease.
Our interest rates remain the same, level of income will decrease.
Exactly. So our interest rates will remain the same. We've not touched the LM curve yet. So what would decrease would be our level of income. And this is because this is a contractionary fiscal policy. So we spoke about the reduction in government spending. So what this will do, it will shift our IS curve to the left from IS to IS1, right? Our original equilibrium was at the point A. With the shift in IS curve, our new equilibrium or our new model becomes IS1 and LM and the original LM. So our new equilibrium becomes A1. At point A1, our interest rate remains the same, but our level of income has reduced, right? You guys now know how to explain this, right? So if you were explaining this the way we did last week, you start by the change. So a reduction in government spending, what does it do to your overall demand? It reduces your demand. What does it do when it reduces your demand? It then reduces Y. And then you remember you need to interpret the impact in the goods market, and you must also interpret the impact on the financial market, yeah? So this is what we covered last week, so that the chain of events is complete. You start at the change in variable, you explain what is happening to it in terms of demand and the level of income. You take it, if the level of income has reduced, you interpret it in terms of the goods market. So what does that mean in terms of consumption? What does that mean in terms of investment? What does that mean in terms of interest rates? You then take it to the financial market, and then you have your entire story there. But as government, you are now worried because you can't just leave it at the reduction of Y. And this is the importance of policy mix, right? Because you have an objective, which is to reduce your government deficit. But you also need higher levels of income. You need economic growth. So what do you do to achieve higher levels of income? You need to employ some expansionary policy. So in this case, we're going to employ an expansionary monetary policy. So what do we want to do here? We want to reduce the government deficit, but we want to still achieve higher levels of income. So our contractionary fiscal policy has reduced our level of income. What do we then need to do to get back to our original level of income or have higher levels of income?
Reduce the interest rate.
We need to reduce the interest rate, right? So if we reduce the interest rate, what do we call this policy? This is our expansionary. Remember, our biggest problem now is that at Y1, our level of income is low, so our economy is not doing very well. But we also don't want an economy that's not doing very well with a budget deficit. So as government, we decided to reduce the government deficit and then increase our economic growth, right? So if we employ an expansionary monetary policy, what will this do? Which curve is going to be affected?
The LM curve.
LM curve.
The LM curve is going to be affected. Which direction will it go? Up or down?
Down.
It will go down. It will go down. So you then have LM.
LM1.
You then have LM1. Thank you. You then have LM1. You show your arrow. Arrows are very important. They show your lecturers that you understand the direct impact of the variable that is changing. So you show your arrow shifting downwards. You've got your new LM1. You've got your interest rate 1. Where does it then intersect? it then intersects at A2. And A2 is very close to Y0. I mean, if you try draw this to scale, we don't expect you to draw it to scale in the exam or your assignments. We do just expect to see that you understand the direction of the impact. So don't worry about the sizes being exactly the same. Just make sure that you have been able to show the right direction of your diagrams, if it's to the left or if it is downward. So at this point, after employing your expansionary monetary policy, you are now at equilibrium A2. You should explain, right? Initially, I was at A. Government then employed a contractionary fiscal policy. The result of that was equilibrium level A1, which was the same interest rate, but lower levels of income. As government, my objective is, you'll always hear in the news, we're talking about our economy not growing fast enough. We all want our economy to grow. When the economy grows, when Y grows, you have more people getting employed, people demand more, you employ more, poverty is alleviated. So one of the biggest goals of government is economic growth. So that's why after reducing the government deficit, they will always employ another policy that will assist in achieving a higher level of income. From what we have done, we've been able to employ a contractionary fiscal policy. Our interest rates have remained the same. Our levels of income have reduced. We then employed an expansionary monetary policy, which has reduced our interest rate. We know when our interest rates reduces, investments are going to increase, people are going to spend more, our Y will then increase again. So our Y goes back to where it was originally. Are we together? Can we all see that in this example, government has been able to at least deal with the issue of the government deficit and has also been able to achieve some level of economic growth, at least leave it to where it was before the original contractionary fiscal policy. Okay, nobody has a question. Let me check on the chat. Okay, if anybody has a question on the chat function, you will just interrupt me, yeah? Great, so now we move on. So that was the example where the objective is to reduce our budget deficit. You can also have an objective which is just an objective of economic growth, right? We know that government has been battling in the last couple of years to increase economic growth. It's not increasing as much as they would like it to, right? And every administration comes and they promises us we're going to put in place policies to increase the economy. So the question is, how do they do that? So if the economy is in a sluggish state or in a recession, how does government use the policies they have in place to increase the economic growth? So it's really the same thing. So when we talk about policy mix, we're talking about the use of both policies on the ISLM curve, right? So if the question was just for expansionary monetary policy, the question will be specific. It will ask you what is the impact of an expansionary fiscal policy on the ASLM model. That way, you don't need to analyze both models, both policies. But where the question is broad and it's asking you what can government do to reduce a government deficit, for example, that question is broad. You bring in both policies that are at the disposal of government. So let's look at this example. If the objective of government is to increase the level of income or to bring the economy out of a recession, what would government do? So the question is, what is the right policy mix to increase the level of income? If government wants to increase income, What is the right policy mix? What should they do?
Spend more, so increase spend and decrease taxes.
Okay, so in terms of fiscal policy, they could increase their own spend, which means there would be more infrastructure, there'd be a lot going on in the economy, there'll be more jobs, and the demand will increase, and then the level of income will increase. That's correct. They could reduce taxes. If they reduce taxes, a lot of us are going to be happy. We have a lot more to spend on our goods and services. Therefore, our demand also increases and Y also increases. What else could they do?
Monetary, they'll decrease interest rates.
Monetary, they could decrease interest rates. Okay, so there'd be an increase in investment and an increase in Y, and you guys now know the story of how it all plays out. So the question is, how do you show this in a diagram? And it's the same thing. So if you guys have pieces of papers before you, it's very good to always practice this. So you always draw. I'm also drawing as I'm talking to you. So on my Y-axis, I've got my interest rates. On my X-axis, I've got my level of income. When I have my level of income, I then have my downward sloping IS curve 0, and I've got my horizontal LM curve 0. So if we take the first, it doesn't matter which example we take, if we take the reduction in taxes, which is an expansionary fiscal policy, which curve is affected there? Is it LM or IS?
IS.
The IS.
Which direction is it? Is it to the left or is it to the right?
To the right.
It is to the right because it's an expansionary fiscal policy. So you draw your IS curve, you label it as IS1. Yeah. On your original equilibrium point, you have Y0 and interest rate 0. Then you've got a new equilibrium point at IS1 and LM0. So then you've got Y1. You can see that your Y has expanded or it has increased. This is the effect of a expansionary fiscal policy. An expansionary fiscal policy has increased our level of Y, and our interest rates have remained the same. How can we expand this economy further? Right? Someone suggested that we can also reduce our interest rate. So if we reduce our interest rate, our LM curve will shift to the left. You draw another vertical LM curve there. You have LM1. So where IS1 and LM1 interact, you then have a new Y2, right? That's your new equilibrium level that I'm calling A2. So what you then have, in the case of our example here, it's labeled as C. What you then have now is even greater levels of Y. I hope you guys can see this. So in the diagram here, so that I just don't confuse you, the diagram in the study guide, which is the one we're reflecting here, we've shifted our IS curve to the right from IS to IS1. Our new equilibrium is at the original LM and IS1 with the equilibrium of B. So you can see somewhere in between Y and Y1, we needed an intermediary level of income. So this is what I'm calling Y1. Then when the LM curve or when the monetary policy is implemented, you then get even a further expansion, which then pushes out our level of income to Y1. So in this case, we've been able to achieve high levels of the level of income. You can see the shift, these two expansions there. So I hope you guys understand. That's really the thought process of how you go into this. And as usual, just remember the IS curve is affected by variables that affect the goods market, and however they affect demand, that is what determines whether it's a leftward shift or a rightward shift. Whilst the LM curve is affected by the financial market, and whatever affects the financial market, which is interest rates, in this case then determines whether it's shifting left or right. So these are some of the questions that I thought we could go through together just to test our understanding. So if we check question 24, we are assuming there's a budget deficit in this country, Balali, and they're asking us what does a deficit mean, and I think somebody gave us an answer. And what is the answer here? Is it 1, 2, 3, or 4?
2.
The answer is 2, right? So a government deficit is when your government spending is greater than your taxes, right? So your answer there would be 2. If we move on to 25, a budget deficit, a reduction can be achieved by. So we did this now. So a budget deficit reduction can be achieved by. Is it a contractionary fiscal policy, an expansionary fiscal policy? Is it interest rate? Is it increasing government spending or increasing taxes? What is the correct answer?
Contractionary fiscal.
The right answer is?
A.
Okay, so someone says A. That is correct. A should be able to do that. So B is out, C is out, D is out. What about E? Is an increase in taxes not a contractionary fiscal policy?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is, right? Okay, so there's something wrong with that question. The answer is A and E.
So does this mean if you choose both A and E, you'd be correct, or do you have to choose one of them?
This is one of those instances where Thea could give us a clarification on
Molly,
how.
I don't see. This is a mixed question with different answers. So there's supposed to be
There's supposed to be an option for A and
options
E.
A and E. Yes,
Yeah.
I think you forget to add that.
Yeah.
Because you can see that's a combination question, and this is not, it's A, B, C, D, and E. So it can be A and B, A and C, whatever. So I don't think this question is complete.
Yeah. So I think here we need an option. Maybe the MCQs had the options, but I just brought these so that we can the thinking process around it. So you guys mustn't. You should think through. Right? So you don't just see A and you don't think about the other options. So in the exam context, like Thea is saying, this would have been a combination question where the multiple choice answers would have been A or B, A, B, C, A, E, and then you choose the correct one. In this case, you'd need to choose A and the E combination. Moving on to 26, in the IS-LM model, a budget deficit reduction can be illustrated by and the level of output and income. What is the answer? Anyone? We just did this now. So the budget deficit reduction, we said this is a contractionary fiscal policy. So this can be illustrated by, is it 3 and 4? Which curve shifts? Here, is it the IS curve or the LM curve that shifts? The IS curve goes downwards, right? Because we're talking of a budget deficit. And we said our budget deficit, so in question 25, we said the budget deficit would be corrected by a contractionary fiscal policy. A fiscal policy would shift our IS curve. So clearly 3 and 4 are out. You need to be thinking between 1 and 2. Is it shifting leftwards or rightwards?
1 is the answer. Left.
1 is the answer. It's shifting leftwards, and the answer there is that the level of output and income will decrease. This is because it's a contractionary fiscal policy, and you can see it in the diagram on the right there. So a contractionary fiscal policy would be an increase in taxes, and in terms of how it works, we did this last week. It will affect your disposable income, which will affect your consumption function, which will affect your demand, which will affect your level of income. And there you have it. So your level of income will decrease and your IS curve would have shifted leftwards. Okay, we're almost done. Do we still have time? Okay, yeah, we've got 15 minutes. So we can continue.
Can you please zoom in a little bit, ma'am? The screen,
So,
like, I can't see anything.
you can't see?
Yes, the screen is like very small.
Okay,
Yes.
let me try increase it. How is that? How is that? Is that better?
It's way better.
Okay. So we're now on question 27 on policy mix questions. So question 27 says, to counteract the impact of a level on the level of output and income, this country, Balali, can implement one policy that involves in the interest rate. So it wants to counteract the impact on the level of income. What policy can be implemented and what is the impact on the interest rate?
2, contractionary policy and an increase in the interest rate.
Okay. How did you know it needed to be a monetary policy?
There's reference to the interest rate.
Exactly. So you knew that your interest rate had to move, and the only way your interest rate moves is the LM curve, right? So sometimes it's just about thinking about the theory and the implication of what this means. You know, it's the monetary policy, so already you know 1 and 3 are out. Yeah, so the question is, are we employing a contractionary monetary policy or an expansionary monetary policy?
It's expansionary.
In this case, the monetary policy is expansionary because our interest rate is decreasing. So the correct answer is 4. 4 is the correct answer. So let's do question 28. So question 28 to 30, I got this from the study guide, so you guys can go and do this again. But I was just hoping that I'd be able to bring out the thought process on how you think about these things. So question 28 to 30 are based on the following information. We now have a new country where the economic growth in the economy decreases for 2 consecutive periods. What do we call this in economics? If the economy decreases, so if the economic growth decreases for 2 consecutive periods, what is the right economic term that we use there?
A recession.
It's a recession. So this country, another, is in a recession. And 28 says, which one of the following statements is correct? To avoid a recession in this scenario, both fiscal and monetary policy must be used simultaneously. This requires a fiscal policy and a monetary policy. What is the answer here?
It's expansionary fiscal
Number
policy.
1. Contractual fiscal, explanatory monetary.
We want to increase our Y.
Yes,
Right?
number 1 is correct.
Oh,
3.
okay.
So we have a recession. This country wants to avoid the recession, which means our Y needs to increase.
Oh, my apology. Then it'll be expansionary fiscal and expansionary monetary.
Yeah, then the answer is 3.
Number 3.
Yeah, this is the example we did now. Okay, then 29, in terms of the IS-LM model, an IS curve shifts to the and the LM curve shifts to avoid a recession. So that's just a follow-up. So if it's an expansionary fiscal policy, IS curve will shift to there, right? And LM curve will shift to there.
Upwards.
To shift upwards.
Will it shift upwards? LM.
Yes.
Downwards.
It'll go down.
Or
Downwards,
downwards.
because it's also an expansionary monetary policy.
Yes.
So the right answer is 4. It's a rightward shift of the IS curve and a downward shift of the LM curve. The answer there is number 4. And then 30, in terms of the ISLM model, the macroeconomic stabilization policies the country has followed can be represented graphically by. So this is just summarizing 28 and 29. Yeah, which diagram correctly depicts the policies we've been choosing? Is it A, B, C, or D? It's D, right? We said it's an expansionary fiscal policy and an expansionary monetary policy. We said an expansionary fiscal policy shifts IS to the right, and an expansionary monetary policy shifts LM downwards. So the correct answer here would be D. Then just the last question before we go, 31. Which one of the following statements is correct? Within the ISLM model, if a contractionary fiscal policy is applied, the higher the interest rate set by the monetary authorities. Which one is the right answer? So the question says, which one of the following is correct? Within the ISLM model, if a contractionary fiscal policy is applied, the higher the interest rate set by the monetary policy, by the monetary authorities, the less the impact of the level of output and income, the greater the impact remains the same. Which one is the correct
answer? The greater
two.
the impact of the level of output and income.
Okay, let's think about this, right? So they're saying if the interest rate set is really high, so think of this. So here you've got a situation where you've got I1, I2, I3. So they're asking us to look at scenario I3. So if the interest rate is really high, then a contractionary fiscal policy, which means our IS curve shifts to the left, yeah, shifts downwards. So from equilibrium level A, it then goes to equilibrium level D. From A to D, it says the less the impact on the level of output, the greater the impact remains the same. Which one has bigger impact between LM, LM1, LM2, and LM3?
LM3.
LM3, right? So the answer is 2.
Answer is 2.
Exactly. So this question just wanted you to be able to see that the different LMs are the different levels of interest rates, and if you shift IS, the greatest impact on the level of income, although it's a reduction, it's gonna be on LM3. So the answer there is 2. And our last question, 32, which of the following policy actions in the ISLM model is appropriate if the objectives are to simultaneously decrease the budget deficit and increase the level of output and income? So we did this example just now. So the objective is to reduce the government deficit, but to also increase Y. Which one is the answer?
A contractionary fiscal and expansionary monetary.
3.
Exactly. So the answer is 3. Yeah, it was the very first example we did. So a contractionary fiscal and an expansionary monetary. We know we need to talk about a fiscal policy because it's a reduction on government deficit. So either a reduction in G or an increase in T. And they also wanted an increase in the level of output, which means we needed a policy that would increase our demand, which is a reduction in interest rates, which is then an expansionary monetary policy. Okay, so that's all I had for you today. Those are all the questions that I thought were relevant and that could help us just think about how to process this kind of questions and how to apply both the LM and the IS policies on the IS-LM model. So does anyone have a question?
Ma'am, I just have one question. The A in our study guides shows it's a small a, and I see in the textbook they use a capital A. Does it make a difference?
No, it doesn't. As long as you are able to show the point of interaction and there's an alphabet there.
Okay, thank you.
The marker will be able to see that you are referring to that as the equilibrium point.
Thank you.
Okay, it looks like that is the end of the questions. Thea, thank you very much for hosting us today.